Continuing our introduction to Kodshim, I would like to call to your attention a paragraph here in the Mesifta that I think should be mentioned as we enter into Tisha B'Av. He writes, Limud Hilchos Kodshim. He says the following, that you might argue that now that we don't have the avoda in the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore the avodah is batel with Churban Abayis, maybe it's pointless to learn the halachas of Kodshim. And he writes, on the contrary, dafka because we have lost the Mikdash, the study of Hilchos Kodshim becomes even more significant. Milvad mashu kol b'tzivui haTorah lilmod es kol hamitzvos shenemar limadatim osam u'shmartem lasosam. Here, in regard to Kodshim, there's a special kiyum in addition to kol haTorah kula. B'chiba yisera nodalo lahalomed mishum shechoshev ka'osek be'akrovas ha'kavonos atzma. This is amazing. By learning Kodshim, it's considered as if he is involved in being makir of the korban. The kach omu chachamim, he quotes the Gemara at the end of Menachos, Rabbi Yochanan Omar, Talmidei chachamim ha'oskim behilchas avoda, mala aleim ha'kosav kilu nivne migdash b'yamein. You know, if we're mourning and grieving over the loss of the Beis HaMikdash, here's an opportunity, ki'ilu nivne. It's as if you're rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash. How? Says Rabbi Yochanan, because you're learning the halachos of the avodah. Omer Reish Lakish, my ditziv vayikra zayin zos haTorah la'olah lemincha lechatos liyosham ala osek b'Torah. Right, it opens the pasuk with the zos haTorah ki ilu hikriv Ola mincha chatos v'yashim. The only thing I don't understand is why Shlomim is so many. Rava Amar, kol ha'osek b'Torah, eino tzorech lo ola v'lo mincha v'lo asham. Unbelievable. According to Rava, the substitution here is identical. He doesn't even need to bring the ola. All right, Yitzchak, my desiv, Zos Toras Chatos, Bezos Toras Hasham, Kol Osek B'Toras Chatos, Ki Ilu Hikriv Chatos, Kol Osek B'Toras Hasham, Ki Ilu Hikriv Hasham. And the Chafetz Chaim, he points out, writes a whole mimer, which is called Torah Or, and we can learn a little bit of this mimer just to get a feeling for what the Chafetz Chaim's opinion was about the special significance of learning about Kodshim. Question is if I could find it. No, he tells you where to find it in a Sefer Kol Likutei Halachos. Okay, I don't have access to this, but what I do remember is that the Chafetz Chaim was the greatest proponent of learning Kodshim, and he even created a special kollel to study Kodshim, and he had an impact on many, many different greats, you know, who put Kodshim back on the map, because for a long time, Kodshim was kind of ignored. Okay, let's go on in our introduction. And we are up to, second, I made a note of it here. Elu behemos v'ofos mevi'in b'chol korban. So you have that. That's on page Dalit on the left side. So we've listed all the different kinds of animals and birds that qualify for the Mizbeach. And now we want to link up the various categories of karbanos of zvachim with the various species of animals. So we start with a karban ola, as we always start with an ola. You can have an olas behema, you can have an ola of an oaf. So an olas behema would apply to any of the categories of behema that we spoke about, which means bakar, and it means kvasim, and it means izim. All of the above lend themselves to a karban ola, and that's called olas behema. However, olas behema is dafka min az-zachar v'lo min an-nekeva. So we're talking about, in the case of bakar, a par as opposed to a para. We're talking about an egel as opposed to an egla. We're talking about an ayil as opposed to an ayala or a rochel, otherwise known as a rochel, or a keves as opposed to a kivsa. And we're talking about a sa'ir as opposed to a se'ira, and a se'ir izim as opposed to se'iras izim. So the nekevas are excluded from oath. Then we get, I'm sorry, what did I say oath? I meant to say from behema. I meant to say from oath. So an olas behema is from a zachar, all types of behemoths. That means bakar and son and izim, kvasim and izim, but only in the males and not in the females. Then we get to oath. As far as oath is concerned, you can have an olas ha'of, you can have a chatos ha'of, and that's whether a nekeva or a zach, makes no difference. Now, chatos has a much broader application than ola, because in ola, we excluded the nekevos, but in chatos, we don't exclude nekevos. So chatos va mikol sugei habehemos ve'ha'ofos bein min hazcharim ubein min hanekevos. And again, just to reiterate what we spoke about the other day, that ola could come b'nedava, chatos is eno ba b'nedava. But then again, that's not relevant to what we're discussing today. I'm just reminding myself. Asham, Eino ba ela min hakvasim o min ha'elin. Now, I'm not sure what he means by kvasim o elin. Oh, I understand. Kvasim, he means the young ones, right? That are, let's say, a 1 year old. And elim are those that are 2 years old, going into their third year. Asham requires either kvasim or elim, but it's only min hazcharim. In that sense, asham is similar to ola, that it requires zechar. But there's no such thing as an asham from bakar, from a par, or a shar, if you want to call it, from an egel. Shlomim is like chatos. It has the broadest scope. Kol suge behemos, bein zecharim, bein nekevos. I'm trying to figure out if there's such a thing as a carbon shlomim in our ophos. I don't think so. mean, we spoke about Torim and Bnei Yom, but so there are no karbanos of ophos neither in the case of an asham nor in the case of shlom. Bechar kol sugya behema, and it's only a zachar. Maser kol sugya behema beimin aschar beimin akevus. Carbon pesach is only a keves or a seir izim, and those are zachar. Karbanos hatzibur einam poem el min azchar. Okay, now we get to the concept of mechusar zman. All karbanos einam kshem lakrav el miyom hashmini v'hol. We have to wait till the 8th day since the birth of the carbon. Kodam l'cheina carbon pos. Vehu anikra mechusar zman. So before the 8th day, it's called mechusar zman. Nechluku bazeh im shmonas hayomim nimnim me'esli es. Do we count 24 hours times 8 from the moment it was born? If it was born on a Sunday at the 5th hour, then we have to count a full week till the 8th day, but we have to wait until the 5th hour. Or alternatively, the second opinion is that we apply the principle of Bixas Hayom Kikulo, and therefore, even if the animal was born at the end of the day, for example, let's say the animal was born at the end of Yom Rishon. So we fast forward a week to the 8th day, and at the beginning of Yom Rishon, which is not Me'es Le'es of 8 days, we can already bring the carbon. And then we apply the principle of Mixas Hayom Kikulo. And by the way, we're going to apply Mixas Hayom Kikulo in 2 directions. Number 1, to count the first day, and number 2, to bring the carbon on the last day, 8 days later, at the beginning of the day. We don't have to wait for the full 8th day. Whereas the first opinion holds you need Me'es Le'es times 8, 24 hours times 8. Now he has a chiddush here of the Chazon Ish. I'm not sure if it's based on the Gemara itself. That lechatchila, we should wait 30 days after the birth of the animal. Ein makrivin es hakarbanos lechatchila el miyom shloshim. I'm not sure if that's a Gzeira D'Rabbanan or it's a Doraisa. It just tells you in the footnote that that's the Chiddush of the Chazon Ish.
Do we normally say like 30 days shows that whatever was viable? And it's always
Could be. Maybe that's what the Chazon Ish has in mind. The only thing is, what are you going to do with Bechar, Maser, and Korban Pesach, which he says, I mean, is there a greater chance in those categories that they'll last 30 days if you know? Yeah, what Steve is saying. Steve's saying maybe we're waiting 30 days, Yatza B'chlal Nefel, to make sure that it's not a Nefel, it's a viable animal. But I'm just pointing out that if that be the case, it should be absolute and uniform, applying to every single category of an animal or of a carbon. And yet we're saying here that in the cases of Bechar, Masa, and Korban Pesach, we don't have to wait beyond the 8 days. He says, Kishem sh'asal lahakriv korban, ela b'yom hashmini v'hol kach asal lahagdish behema lekorban tov shivas yom. You're not allowed to be magdish the animal tov shivas yom. Again, is that a doraisa or is it a Rabbanan? Then he has a discussion about Leil Shmini. because there's one opinion that says Laila Eina Mechusas Man, even though again the Bigdash is closed for business, but we view it as a din of the day. It's a din of the yom. It's already the 8th day, so it's not called Mechusas Man, even though it's at night. And what's the din of someone who violates this Easter? But the evidence was magdish the animal before the 8th day. So here we have a sheet of Tosfos that b'di'evet the hegdish is chal, although he shouldn't have done so. And we have another Tosfos elsewhere. First Tosfos is in Zvachim, the second Tosfos is in Erechim. And Tosfos brings an opinion that the hegdish is not chal. And it seems that that's Rashi's opinion as well. So once again, Steve, I don't know, in light of this opinion, if the animal's a treifa, then it certainly would be a carbon plus. So why would the evidence in kosher? I don't know. Maybe it goes into dini sveikif. Now we have a requirement of ben shana. Let's go back and see where we had that. In a case of a keves, so let's say back Kvasim we had a male keves is an aisle. But there you have to wait 30 days. That's its first birthday. In which case do we say you don't even have to wait 30 days immediately after its first birthday? Let's say an ego. Wait a second, what about even a rochel, I think? So in those cases, when we want to calculate a year and we bring the carbon after a year, is nimna, we count the year may ace la'ace. By the way, is relevant to a bar mitzvah as well. From what point does he become a chuyuv in mitzvahs? We have to wait meis li'ace, or it's just a din in mitzvah yom kikula. But in any event, as far as ben shnaso, which is makshir a certain carbon, that's only meis li'ace. Im b'shas shchita hoya ben shana, u'b'shas zrika sadam far ovra shnasa, izman shenolan. Awesome. Shows postos Kodshim. Wow, this is a very rare case that between the zrika, because we're holding now Meis Leis, so between the shchita and the zrika, I don't know how long of a time period passed. Maybe if somebody was mixing up the dam, so it shouldn't be koresh, so it could be an hour or two. And from the perspective of Meis Leis, it might be that by the time we get around to the zrika, it's already past the Meis Leis of that ben shana. So over shana. And we're holding now that shows poslos Kodshim. We don't have to wait for a full day to pass by. Even shows is enough to pass the Kodshim. All right, let's talk a little bit about das bailim right now. Kol karbanos hachova tzricha das bailim sheyedu ha-bailim min akrova yirtzu osa. So when it comes to carbon chova, I cannot bring a carbon on your behalf without you knowing that. And not only that, since a carbon requires das, it requires a bar das to the exclusion of cheresh shota b'katan lav b'nei deyanim. Now here we have a difference between chatas v'yoshim on one hand and ola and shlomim on the other. In chatas v'yoshim we need das bailim at the moment of hakrova. It's not enough that when he was mafresh the carbon he had das bailim. We need das bailim at the time of hakrova. Ubi ola v'shlomim die B'daito b'shas hafrosh. We don't need daito b'shas hakrova. I mean, this is Xeris HaKos, but I would take a stab at it. Chatos v'yasham is essentially, or are essentially, korbanos kapara. The kapara is not inherent in the hafrasha. Hafrasha means you spent a lot of money on the korban. I mean, you spent, to buy a par, a shor for a korban chatos is going to cost you a pretty penny. But that's not the mechaper. The mechaper is inherent in the hakrava itself. And that's why the Zrikas Adam is called the mechaper. It's the maratza, the ritzi korban comes through the Zrika. Therefore, it requires das bailam. If the whole purpose of the korban is to bring ritzu, it's like tshuva. What would be the significance of a person to do tshuva without das bailam? His mind is elsewhere. Meaningless. And the akrava, the korban, in the case of chatas v'yasham, are for the purpose of kapara. So you need das bailam b'shas hakrava. Not so in Ola and Shlom. Although there is a kapara in Ola for sure, for mitzvah say, but that's not the essence of a korban Ola. Korban Ola is a doron, it's some sort of a gift, kaviyachol, that we're bringing to the mizbeach. So the essence of my participation in a korban Ola, or for that matter in a korban Shlom as well, is my das hafrosh. Because you can't bring a korban on my behalf. But if I was mafresh the korban, I, in a sense, tacitly gave you meaning anyone, the green light to go ahead and bring this korban on my behalf, because the very fact that I was mafresh, it indicates that this animal I'm chayiv to bring. You want to bring it on my behalf, that's zachar v'yodam shalom b'fanav, that's fine. But I don't need das bailam b'shas hakrava. All I need is that the korban relates to me. A korban nikral shmo. And whatever ritzui is accomplished by a korban ola or a korban shlamim, all we require is that the korban should be nikral shmo. Whoever brings the korban, that's fine. That's irrelevant. The korban is nikral shmo because it's his korban. He was mafresh us. But again, Rabbi say this is all very speculative. Korbanos mechusrei kapara, hainu zav zav yoledes mitzora, the achar sheniteru mitzuras adayin lo nitshmat harasam mikra mechus kapara sheviu korban harasam einon tzrichim das bail. The other maybe also al beno ubito aktan. Now it's hard to believe that you can have yoledes who's a katana. But Zav Zava is possible, and Mitzorah as well. And once again, I think what we're applying here is the principle of Zach and the other Shalom B'fana. There's no need for Das Bailim if the korban is a required korban, it's a korban chova, and you've already been mafresh the korban, and you desperately need this korban to be mashlim to complete your tara. So anyone who comes forward and offers to bring that carbon that you were mafresh on your behalf, and we're talking about Zav Zava Yoledes B'Torah, then fine, Tola Bracha. It's absolutely valid. And this carbon is Nikra al Shem Bailam. The actual Hakrava and Avas Hakarban, the Bailam are not being, we're not taking permission from the Bailam. Why? Because once the carbon is Chal, and the Bailam desperately need this carbon for their Tara, then Kol Konim Zach, whoever comes by and brings that carbon, which has already been designated as such, by the Mitzorah, or by the Zav Zava Yoledes, then you're doing him the biggest favor by bringing the carbon for him, and that clinches the Tara. There's no need for Das Bailam. And if I'm not mistaken, what he's referring to is a chatos and an osham. Because in the case of Mitzorah, he brings many, many different karbanos. Now, how can we bring a karban osham on behalf of a Mitzorah without das bailam? We said that osham is a mechaper and it needs das bailam, even b'shas hakrova. But the answer, I believe, is that mechusa kapara is the key concept here. That since he desperately needs the kapara, then by bringing it in on his behalf and the korban zikra al shmo, you've clinched his tara. That's a great, meritorious deed. You get brownie points for that, and it's zachar li'adam shelo b'fanav. The only thing I have to admit is problematic here. He says, "Other maybe osan al b'no ubitok hanin." That sounds like we're dealing with a separate halacha where the father and the son, they're like the son is an extended arm of the father because he's banav aktanin. So if it's zachar li'adam shelo b'fanav, it doesn't have to be b'no b'ito aktanin. It could be, I bring it on behalf of anyone. You designate the carbon, I'll bring it on your behalf. Why does he single out b'no b'ito aktanin? That's more common of the case. Ein chatas v'ashamim v'kaprim elamishas tshuva v'svad al cheta. Vidui is an absolute critical requirement to achieve the kapara of a chatas v'yasham. And ein ola maratza al veros essay shebiyodo elim kenos tshuva v'hisvada. So even though the carbon ola, as we said earlier, is not classically a carbon of kapara, but nevertheless, if you want to achieve the kapara for esin, you fail to fulfill an essay, then you will need tshuva and vidu to effectuate the kapara that's inherent in a carbon ola. Meaning, ola is a complex entity. It's essentially not a carbon amachape. So why is bidi and tshuva critical? But the answer is you want to achieve an additional element, a byproduct or an advantage of a surplus of a carbon ola, and that is you want to get kapara. For mitzaseh, then you need vidu and tshuva. So basically, to sum up, there's an unbelievable yisod, a breakthrough. that if you want this carbon to effectuate kapara, whether it's a chatos, an osham, even an olah, then there's no such thing as a magical carbon being machaper without tshuva and vidu. And therefore, every carbon requires the accompaniment of tshuva and vidu. Okay, then, so this is where we'll stop. I'm just making a note here, so.